GMGM, and welcome to the Modern Market. This is our daily show that we run from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. CET. My name is Legendary, and I'm hosting today's show with my co-host Sammy to talk about all things in the modern market, the NFT market, the prediction market, and also a bit on the political market and the political side of things. However, one important thing to get out of the way before we get started is that nothing that we say on this show is financial advice. With that out of the way, Sammy, welcome to the stage. How are you feeling? How are you doing today?
I'm good. Traveling around using this for the first time. So as per B-Check's recommendation. So yeah, beautiful countryside location. But yeah, back in London from Sunday. So back with the usual setup, but keen to get into it.
Love it. Love it. I'm going to be back in London next week, end of next week as well. But I love how we've been standardizing the travel plus stationary equipment for everyone co-hosting the show.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think B's got so many decent. Sorry, I get a bit of feedback from my truck over there. Yeah, B's got so many different tips and experience from traveling around and doing all that. So just going off his recommendations have been absolutely golden.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense, and it's also pretty cool that we finally have the setup that multiple people can host and can run the show in the usual manner if one of us is traveling.
When's your next trip? Are you looking forward to that now that you're kind of back from the US, or
I mean,
you locking in for a period of time?
I didn't expect to fly so soon again. So flying to London end of next week, but I'm happy actually that the cooling at least is working in my place again. So I was telling the story throughout the week. I was struggling with the cooling floors stopped working, and that's back on. So at least I know I can, leave the house. Yeah, I know the mobile AC that you're sharing for everyone watching us on video on YouTube or on X video. But I'm happy that this is working again, and now I know when I leave the house and I come back, everything will be like cool and chill, and I don't run into that overheated situation again.
That's nice. Yeah, we don't have that luxury in the UK. Like barely any places have cooling units. So I think when I was in Australia for 4 years, they had like one unit in the whole flat. So you'd have to be in that particular room for it to work effectively. Otherwise, in the summer things got too hot, and in the winter things got too cold. So it's I'm yet to experience the prime temperature thermometer thing that goes on in like the likes of Austria.
Yeah, no, Austria it's actually an exception. Like it's very rare to have like cooled or heated floor ceilings, and basically there's a de facto AC ban in Vienna in specifically, and there's actually been a lawsuit on that went to the highest to the Supreme Court in Austria because someone had like 35 degrees Celsius, so like I don't know 93, 94ish Fahrenheit in their own place. And they were like, this is not livable. This is not a bearable condition. And the Supreme Court basically said, nope, you cannot have an AC because it's not typical for the Vienna optic that people have ACs. And because this is not the standard, you can't have one. And they were also arguing if that standard is ever to change, it needs that more people first need to have an AC, which is barely impossible to get. You can have one if you have your own place that you own, but only if it's a standalone house. If you own an apartment in a building, you need every single other apartment owner, every single one, not 50%, not 66%, 100% of them to agree in written with you that you can have your AC unit. And it can't be put on the facade. So you need to have a balcony, a terrace, or a rooftop garden, whatever, that it is hidden from basically the street view, which makes it de facto impossible for 99% of people to have AC or any form of cooling. And I actually looked into another statistic that compared people dying of excessive heat in the US versus Europe on a yearly basis. And I think we have 37,000 heat deaths all over Europe per year. And that number is, I think, like 1 to 2K in the States, if not even lower than that. So it's absurd to have the difference in regulation, especially with how climate change is evolving.
So there you go. The modern market now covers air conditioning. That's some in-depth knowledge.
Absolutely. I mean, once the regulation is going to change all over Europe, some air conditioning companies might profit from that. But with that out of the way, I think we have a lot to cover on today's agenda. So let's get straight into it. Let's start as per usual, with the price action, it's been a pretty flat day. BTC is just down a touch, 0.14% at 58.4K. ETH is up a touch at 2.6K, up 0.26%. And Solana also only down a touch at $143. In terms of the main headlines that we want to cover today, we have Donald Trump holding over $1 million in Ether, also receiving NFT licensing fees. There's a couple more details to that make the article interesting, in my opinion, that I want to get into. Sammy has written a pretty deep dive analysis on how prediction markets could work in a decentralized way, how NFTs could play a role in that, to be collateralized, to also be able to borrow against them. I feel like this is a very important topic because we've been covering prediction markets for quite a while on the one hand. On the other hand, we've been talking about NFT momentum coming back a bit. So definitely want to give Sammy the chance to dive deeper into this piece of news, into his analysis for us. And finally, the title of the show, institutional BTC buys are up massively. It's not only pension funds, it's a lot of funds in the US buying. We have quite some interesting statistics on that I want to cover today. In terms of the notable sales, we have one CryptoPunk. I'm sharing that on screen for everyone watching us on YouTube or on X on video, with VR glasses that just sold for 37 ETH. And then we have actually two interesting trades, probably wash trades, but I kind of wanted to point them out because they started to gain a bit more prominence on the timeline, with two apes sold significantly above floor. The one I am sharing is a nice ape, but not a golden one, not a super rare one, and it sold for 69 ETH for $180,000 on OpenSea. Moving on to our NFT marketplace partner Mintify to take a more general look at the NFT market per se. We had a very green day yesterday, and that green momentum is continuing. We have Bored Apes up a touch, 12.6 ETH floor price. We have Pudgies up 2% at a 9.4 ETH floor price. Miladies, Remilios also moved up a touch. Doodles and Azukis, however, have pumped more, with Doodles at a 1.8 ETH floor up 6%, and Azukis up 7% at a 4.4 ETH floor. However, one of the biggest winners of the last 24 hours is actually a collection that we have not touched on in quite a while. It's the Moonbirds. They are back to a 0.4 ETH floor, which for that collection constitutes a price change of 22% over the last 24 hours. Sammy, anything in the NFT market that is standing out to you at the moment?
So the one for me was probably Rect Guys. I am a Rect Guy holder, and I'll probably be involved in the investment round. But like the stuff that's going on there, yeah, I think it seems to have catalyzed since the video, and I've just posted the video in the private chat. So if you wanted to share that quickly, but I thought it was just genius. Like this guy, it's a bit of background. This guy went in on a syndicate for a racehorse. Ended up doing pretty well. So there's three friends that did it, got a bit of coverage on the ITV News. And he's done a kind of a comical video of Rect Drinks. It's kind of like an advert that he's done for them. I don't know if it was official, but it's pretty decent. And I think that has kind of catalyzed a bit of interest around Rect Guys and coming into like the drank points that you can earn through purchasing the drinks online. I think they've got a target of maybe 300,000 units to be sold in the next month, I think. But yeah, it's definitely something to pay attention to. And I think it leans into that utility just outside of holding an NFT for a PFP or whatever. You've actually got some real revenues coming in. And that's something that's probably super interesting to me, just outside of the speculative side of things.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. And also in terms of the floor price, for those not watching us on video, it's up 42% over the last 24 hours, 0.42 ETH floor. And even more impressive if you look at the metrics for the last 7 days with a 100% pump, so with a double up in price.
And I think it's probably worth mentioning some of these holders, like back in 2022, Snoop Dogg owned one of these. You've got Raoul Pal, who's a supporter of OSF and the Rect Guy artwork. So there's some big names in there. So I think Mooncat's one of the biggest holders. You've got Normandy Whale. So there's a strong community. And some of the events that took place, and it's one of the reasons why I got involved, was London NFT London, there was like a box, a place called the Box that we went to for after the event, which was a good vibe. So yeah, I think there's something to it, the strength of those communities, and I think you spoke about the NFT comeback yesterday. I think these communities that are really strong will probably come back the strongest. And I wouldn't write off Wrecked Guy as being one of those.
What level of importance or relevance do you attribute to that in real life component? We had quite a heated discussion on that yesterday, with some people saying, nah, it doesn't matter at all. Some people saying it's everything. I very much know that a lot of the punk holders are super happy about the in real life events that are hosted by the punks team at multiple major conferences, and the brunches and everything are super popular. But how do you feel about that? Because you mentioned direct guys specifically.
I think it completely depends on the community. Like if you've got a large portion of that community that lives in a specific location, then I think it can be pretty important and pretty useful. But if people are sporadically spaced all over the world, then I think it has less of an importance, because you have to host those in a more decentralized manner, and to get those all organized, it's just not cost effective. So I think it just depends on a community by community basis. I think that with OSF and Mando, both from London originally, and a lot of the community that are UK based, it kind of makes sense for those. And the 2022 event was pretty big. But yeah, I think some of these other communities that are kind of a bit more global, it becomes a bit more difficult to justify those in real life events. And I think maybe just tagging them onto the conferences, the main conferences, makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. I mean, it's very similar to how we think about the events at On the Mono Market, right? We've been doing the events in London, which kind of makes sense. The two of you are based in London. I'm flying in pretty frequently either way. And there's a strong community there for sure. But it still comes with the limitation that, like, you know, some of the people who listen in with us daily, like Funky, who has his hand up, we're going to go to you in a second, can't join at these events. So it then makes sense to attach that to conferences where people typically would attend. Funky, you have your hand up. Welcome to the stage, my friend. What are your thoughts on our discussion so far?
Jam fam. Yeah, I just want to chime in on the community aspect, because I feel that this is something that is probably underrated for many people, because unless you've actually experienced it, like I'm sure Captain has been to some of these Bored Ape meetups. I know Steve has, and those are certainly very popular. Like here, you know, my kingdom, the kingdom, we get together on King's Day, which is the biggest street party in Amsterdam, and it'll be our 4th year doing it. And you guys know this just from having been in this space for a number of years. When you make genuine relationships with people and then you meet them IRL, there's something qualitatively different about people you become friends with online. And to do that, and it's to your point, it's difficult, right? Because not everybody can get to Amsterdam. But when you get, you know, and it's a small collection, there's not a lot of holders, but it's such a crazy weekend to do something like this, get together and have that sort of camaraderie. And to the point where, because I'm in the States and there are a number of Kingdom holders who are also in the States, like BBF and I, my wife, are doing something in New Orleans coming up in mid-October, which is about 6 months apart. And that gives an opportunity, because they have a massive street party. It's the second biggest one to Mardi Gras. And I feel like that is a tremendous value to, you know, this was something Bchek was talking about. Like meme coins don't really generate the same level of community and camaraderie the way that NFT collections can. I'm not saying that they all do, but they certainly can. And it really does evolve around the people that you draw into the community and what they make of it. But I think that there is really a tremendous value in doing some of these things together in real life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And because you mentioned Memecoin, it actually would lead us into the discussion point for the day. But before I go there, I want to give a quick shout out to some of the YouTube comments. Kashmir has been saying that, in their opinion, the revenue share model doesn't really make sense, especially with collections that have 5 to 10K items, because why would people hold for a couple of dollars in return? That needs a better business model. However, Kashmir is also admitting that he loves OSF and Mando, and that the strong community that the both of you have been mentioning is the keyword. So I feel like it's a combination of multiple aspects, right? You have the community side, you have a business model that might need a couple more flywheels to really be feasible at a larger scale, but community definitely is at the heart of that. Sammy, I think you want to come in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in the vast majority of projects. I don't think that having a real revenue will actually work, because ultimately it comes down to the execution of that like business model and the strategy. And some people just aren't made out to be like break into these markets outside of the NFT space. And I think that then adds a completely different layer to like distribution model and all that kind of stuff, and making connections in that particular industry. And I think that then adds such a larger amount of risk to that project. So I think like with Rec Drinks, like yes, they're breaking into like the drinks and probably branding and IP stuff a little bit more. But I think it's placing a bet on the founders. You've got the Plague, which has kind of spun off the making coffee business, which looks to be doing all right. And actually they've got that those coffee beans into some of the cafes in London, which I really want to try out. And I've seen them quite visible at the conferences like Paris and a few other places. So you can see some founders probably have the nous to do pretty well on the business side of things as well as the NFT side. So I agree with you to an extent, but I think you just have to be selective about who you think is going to do well within that industry outside of NFTs, because ultimately if they don't have the experience or the network there, then they're up against it from day one, and you're pretty much betting on them to do well and break into that industry and make those connections. And sometimes it's worth partnering with existing brands in the space to then kind of plug into those connections. And I know Degen Distillery is one of them that's plugged in with Brewdog. So they've got a distribution network globally into like Sainsbury's, Tesco's. They've got their own pubs. So all of a sudden you then don't have that initial headwind. So I think the partnership angle is super important. And if you see these projects partnering with big players in those particular industries, then that's a pretty bullish sign, because they acknowledge that maybe it isn't their forte, and therefore they're bringing on the expertise that are in the industry that they want to break into.
Yeah, that's such a strong take. Like we speak a lot about how important distribution is, and that's obviously not only true within the Web3 space, but especially if you want to scale out and do other things. And then if it's not your forte, if it's not your strong suit, you need those partners to rely on. So we spoke a good while about the community aspect. I want to go into the take of the day that kind of is touching more on the network aspect of NFTs. And it's a discussion that we obviously had before, but I'm curious to then hear your thoughts on it, Sammy, because I know that you think a lot about fractionalization when it comes to NFTs. So I'm just going to go straight to the post. I'm sharing this on screen for the people watching. Atare is saying, why meme coins scale faster than NFTs? NFTs rallied this week. DGOTs are up, BAC apes are up, and meme coin fatigue is setting in. Thanks, Pump Fun. So naturally, everyone is saying NFTs are back, but there's one glaring issue. NFT network effects don't work. The same was as meme coins. The crypto game, however, is all about network effects, aka how many holders do you have? And more holders is always better. More holders means a larger network effects, and a larger network effects means better chance to hit $1 billion market cap. We've seen this with meme coins like Boom, Whiff, and Pepe. But with NFT networks, two core problems remain. The network size is limited by the number of NFTs, and the higher the price goes, the more people are priced out, meaning the NFT network growth is counterintuitive, and the proof is on chain. The post goes on for a bit more, but I think the key point has been made that Atare's thesis is that network size is limited, obviously, by the number of NFTs, and higher price is starting to price people out. I have a couple of thoughts on that, but wanted to go to you, Sammy, for your initial reaction on this commentary.
Well, I immediately go to Pudgies. I think like Luca kind of broke down the funnel. So you have the Genesis NFTs at the base of the funnel, which is ultimately where you want to drive all the value to, or a lot of the value to. But as you go further up, you've got like little Pudgies, you've got the rogs, you've got the plushies, and then you've got the IP, so like videos and things like that, that storytelling that might people might find valuable on the likes of Instagram or whatever, just like brightening the day, just kind of getting exposure to the ecosystem that way. So I think people can participate in it at different levels, and I agree to an extent that in the fungible side, like you have more participants at the same level that can like layer in and layer out as much as they want to get into the ecosystem, based because it's more fungible. Like you can literally just buy smaller denominations of it. But I do think that it then becomes harder to get a lot of people kind of committed to the cause. Whereas we think with NFTs, if you start with a small user base, you drive value to them, you can then scale it slowly, but you have to do it in a more organic way. So I think it's just a different model. And I think that you do have a stronger relationship with your holder base as an NFT collection, because it is smaller and it is more intimate generally, unless you start with like a 10k PFP collection and then you just don't give them any value, in which case you're not going to do very well from the get-go. But I do think I agree but disagree with his take to an extent.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. And I think also another part that I want to point out is the analogy that Atter is making, saying that memecoin networks are like countries, while NFT networks are like small islands, which might explain why people enjoy NFTs a lot more, because NFTs are fun, the network is smaller and can't grow as large by design. It's like a small community village, and it kind of goes to what you've been saying about. You get to know the individuals better, you recognize people by the PFPs, and you'll travel the world to meet up with them. And that's not as true for meme coins. I think one interesting aspect adding to that we've been touching on the show the last couple of days is also with regards to Mintify's new feature, that you can look at NFT collections and filter them by market cap, and thus drawing the comparison to market caps of meme coins. I mean, I know we said it's not a perfectly accurate comparison to do, but it's still a number that people like and that people like to compare. So I feel like in a future where you theoretically could have both of these worlds, you can have the strong NFT community on the one hand, and you can have a stronger diversification, even on the fractionalized side, or as you've been saying with Pudgies, right? Pudgies have the plushies. While they still might be a long stretch away from like the core NFT community, they will get closer once more of the games are live, once Abstract Chain is live, which has the goal to onboard people in a crypto abstracted way. And I feel like that it's probably easier for a meme coin to scale within Web3 because you don't have the limitation of the collection size, but it's easier for an NFT brand to scale into Web2 because they are able to build a product, to build a plushies, to build a different kind of culture that people actually care about, to build out strong socials. And I would make the point that, say, if Pepe ever had the plan, for example, to do that and scale into Web2, that would be a way harder thing to do in comparison to a brand like Pudgies. So I think the initial scaling within Web3 is certainly easier to achieve for a meme coin, but in the mid to the long run, where you actually talk about scaling into Web2 and getting more people to come on board in whatever form that may look like, it takes more time, but it's easier and more realistic to achieve for a strong NFT brand.
Yeah, I think because I try and think about, okay, well, what about WIF, MOG? Like, what's the integration that you can do outside of just the vibes and the culture, and you can apply like the MOG glasses to your PFP. You can put the WIF hat on. There's a lot of memes there, but I'm just yet to see it kind of go to the next level from a business model perspective. Whereas, like, I agree that with NFTs, you can literally just plug it into like that IP becomes like transient across like the Web3 space, but also Web2. So you can probably break into it a lot easier. But I think that it does take it a longer time period to get to that stage, and it has to be more organic, and it has to kind of get the trust of those initial like supporters to then build on that. Whereas I think meme coins, you can make a lot of people very rich very early on. And then they kind of, I just don't know where it goes from there. And I think we're seeing a bit of, don't know if it's despair on the timeline. Like, some people are kind of, like our bags are down, like the vibes aren't quite the same. You've got pump.fun making it even less friction to launch a token. So the market's becoming a little bit saturated, which we saw in the kind of after the NFT bull cycle as well. Like, I think there was a number of NFTs, like 99% of them had dropped below 1 ETH or something by that point, and probably 0.01 ETH now. So it'd be interesting to see where this goes next. But I think we might see a bit of a lull with the meme coin stuff as people rotate back into NFTs. But I do think that there'll be a second wind when they find some sort of innovation. And I'm yet to see what that is, but there's going to be something. Like, whether you kind of do like tokenized culture, or like there's going to be something that you can then plug into like a Web2 business model or a traditional business model, that there will be some sort of value. I just don't think we've necessarily found that product market fit yet.
Yeah, talking about product market fit. I actually wanted to go on with the next news to start talking about the institutions buying our BTC bags, but because you were talking about potential future innovation, I think that is the better way to connect our conversation. I would skip the order or shuffle the order around and actually go to your analysis first. I will bring that up on screen. You've been writing this thread on prediction markets and polymarket in specific, and have outlined how decentralized product could look like, what decentralized prediction markets have existed, looked a bit into the liquidity side, also analyzed what role NFTs could play in that. I think it's a super, super interesting read because, again, it connects to a discussion that we just had. But also, we've been talking so much about prediction markets that I would kind of like to get started with that. And the way I want to structure it is, I have a couple questions on that already, but I would like to give you the mic, Sammy, to walk us through your thread and then get into the discussion part around that.
Yeah, I mean, so decentralized prediction markets, I mean, you look at Augur, that's been around since like 2018, so it's nothing new. I do think that, I mean, NFTs have as positions or bets have been kind of trialed before, but I don't think they necessarily got too much traction because the eyes on prediction markets specifically wasn't that huge. Albeit, I don't think people had necessarily put the dots together that this could be like the alternate platform to just betting sites. But you can literally bet on anything, and it's less regulated. And the decentralized aspect I find super interesting because you can, the interoperability, like once you've got a position like Trump to win the election, you can tokenize that as an NFT. And then you can plug that into other third-party protocols. So like you could go to NFTFi or Gondi or whoever it might be. Once they allow that on their platform, you can then put it on there and find a counterparty to take out a loan against that position. So I spoke to that kind of possibility. And I think now that we've got that on, like a lot more eyes on the likes of Polymarket, and there's a lot more volume. Like I think the presidential election alone has got like 605 million in wagered volume so far, which is, it's pretty huge. That's almost a billion of, like, it's pushing it will be pushing a billion of volume for just one particular bet. And I think there'll be a lot of people that kind of lock up their liquidity for, I think it's until like November. So you're looking at another 2.5 months, unless they cash out, but maybe they want to keep exposure. So they maybe could do the position as an NFT, then go to a lending market, take out a loan against their position, and then have that liquidity to do whatever they need to in the meantime. And as long as it's managed correctly, like I think it could be a really useful liquidity tool. But I think I have agreed with some of the people who've responded to the post to say that we don't need any more leverage in the system. And I agree that if you've got someone who's a speculator, a bit of a degen, they might take out a position on Polymarket and then take out a loan against it and then go trade meme coins and not be able to repay that loan, then that does become a bit of an issue. But I think it's an interesting idea. And I think there could be some sort of product market fit for this specifically. But I also then go to talk on about like other potential innovations in this particular space where you've got like variable fees, you've got like Blast has got native yield. So if you do lock up a position for a period of time and you don't want to cash out of that position, you can then earn the protocol, like the native yield from that particular protocol, which is like from MakerDAO, or I think it's Lido if it's ETH. So that's an innovation. You've got bet resolution. So the issue I think with prediction markets at the moment, you've got and I know it's being addressed to an extent, but there's like the outcome. So some of those have been challenged. And if you've got a third party that kind of provides that answer to the particular bet, then that kind of, it provides the additional independence. There's less risk of market manipulation. And I know Chainlink is doing something with this. So they're developing solutions. You've got, so Claros was used by Omen previously. I don't think there's too much volume on there at the moment anymore, but that was something that was kind of plugged in as well, where you use a third party. You could literally click a drop down when you create a particular bet and you provide the odds for that particular bet in the market, then you can then select the third party that will verify the outcome of that bet, so that you're not like you as the creator of that particular bet won't end up coming to, like, your integrity won't come into question then. So I think there's like a number of things in there. And I touched on user-generated markets. So like we've heard about user-generated content, but what about like the decentralized aspect is where any individual can create a bet on the site, a prediction, with all the various inputs, and then people can wage volume on that. And we saw it with was it Luca said like wanted a bet about Pudgy's hitting 100k floor, like being able to then create that as a bet and people can wage volume on that. That's user generated markets. Like that's not necessarily available on traditional prediction markets or betting sites. So there's stuff in there that I think is useful, and this is literally just scratching the surface. And I think in the next 2 or 3 years, like if prediction markets continue to gather momentum, I think we could see a lot of innovation, particularly using blockchain or NFTs to help decentralize that. And who knows, like the more you wage on Polymarket, they could do a token at some point that could become a governance token, and then there might be some integration of that into fee shares. So like fee sharing, like we got up there at the moment, dynamic fees. It's currently Polymarket don't charge any fees on that. So, but there is hints that that fee switch could be turned on at a later stage. Genosis did a dynamic fee, which adjusts based on the trading volume or market conditions. And we've seen with like the likes of OpenSea back in the day, if markets start to turn down and volume drops, people aren't really willing to pay those fees. They'll go elsewhere, the likes of Blur, to trade those NFTs with zero fees. So I think like dynamic fee switches and things like that could be super interesting with these. And ultimately, if you decentralize the platform and you've got the Polymarket tokens used to govern that, then the holders can then decide on that. So yeah, there's a lot of potential avenues that this could go, and I think we are just scratching the surface. So
yeah, thank you very much for this fantastic deep dive into Polymarket, into prediction markets. I think it's been quite a lot in terms of content, so I want to take a couple of things step by step. The first thing that I want to go to, you said collateralizing bets as NFTs. So basically, I take the NFT, I'm able to borrow against that and use it on a regular NFT lending platform, obviously with the caveat being that my betting position will adjust, go up or down, and hence I will have to have some sort of dynamic loan to value model that makes sure that it aligns with how my bet is currently standing. On the leverage point on that, I actually disagree with the commenters saying now we don't need more leverage in the system, because I do think that the market will always get what the market wants, and if people want to do leveraged bets, and I've been kind of having this discussion back and forth on my own timeline as well when I was commenting on the Popcat bet, right? If Popcat goes to $1 billion, you had a better upside at a specific point to do that on Polymarket versus spot buying, and people are making the point, yes, but you're capping your upside because the bet you can win, and it obviously stops at 100 cents, and you're up depending on where you got in on the bet. And others were saying you can buy a leveraged position on Popcat, but I cannot do a leveraged trade on Polymarket. I cannot bet that Trump will win or Harris will win the election, do a 10x leverage on that. That's not possible in the current way. And I do think that having this leveraged edit, whether that's in the collateralized form as NFTs, because obviously if you borrow against that, you could then create another bet, borrow against it, and basically cycle that into a absurdly leveraged position that.
And I think looping is something that like we see it all the time with trading like fungible tokens, but we haven't. Yeah, I agree. We haven't seen that with prediction markets yet. And I think that is definitely a possibility, and that is a form of leverage where like you say, you literally take out a loan, you then use that loan to buy more of that same position, you then collateralize that as an NFT, and you keep doing that, and that's known as like a term called looping.
But you see it with DeFi protocols, right? You can specifically on Solana, where fees are basically non-existent. You have protocols that allowed you to loop your DeFi position multiple times until basically you're already on the verge of getting liquidated because you pushed your LTV to the limit. Another point that you made, and where I think I would like to go a bit deeper on that, is the bet resolution. And you said, bets can be challenged. So maybe for those people who are not familiar with that, how the process is currently working on Polymarket is that a bet is being set up. The terms are stipulated in the beginning. The terms are very, very specific, but sometimes still leave some room for discussion. And we've seen that. I think one of the most prominent examples was the ETH ETF approval, where people were discussing, is it the S1 filing? Is it the S2 filing? At what exact point does it count as an ETF approval? And then you can basically challenge the result, the outcome of the bet, the resolution. Then that will have a review. I think the review can also be challenged. And then there's like a final outcome of the bet. And that's obviously still happening in a, I would say, like semi-transparent way. Like you can track that on Polymarket and you can see what's going on, but it's not the same level of transparency that you would have if that could be used in a way that utilizes oracles like Chainlink and would actually make for a fully decentralized process and transparent process. And I think that this process exactly is the key to like what I would find one of the more interesting innovations, which is being able to have the decentralized markets, which you compare to YOLO, where you can, with the YOLO pool or the ETH pool, basically be the house and profit when the casino is making money. And in this case, it's not easy to create your own bets. And I feel like this will be one of the more trickier things to solve for, because obviously you could make, I don't know, we have Easy in the audience with us, and Easy could make a bet in his own show. Will I say the term XYZ, betting on that, and then saying that? I mean, obviously Trump could do that at the same point right now with Polymarket as well if he wanted to, but that's probably limited to a very small circle of people who actually are relevant enough to have their own Polymarket bets going and have relevant volume attached to them. So I feel like if you go into those decentralized bets and into a state where like everyone can create their own bets, this will be very interesting how we will be solving for potentially creating bets that you can win yourself. Do you have any more thoughts on that in particular?
Well, I think there has to be like an approval process to be able to do that, to actually get on and actually create your own bets. I don't think you can have any Tom, Dick, or Harry on there creating a bet, because like most of those won't even get any volume at all. If it's so ridiculous that people just probably aren't even interested. So I think there has to be certain criteria in the place on the protocols to then make that eligible for a particular bet or hit certain thresholds. And maybe that comes through the governance process. So if for instance, Polymarket decentralizes and a token's created, maybe the token holders then have to vote. I know there's going to be issues with like people that hold a significant amount of the tokens in the protocol, but yeah, I think there's ways that you can kind of engineer it, but I do think there has to be some sort of threshold in there, because otherwise it's going to be a shit show otherwise, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it needs an approval process. And what it also needs is, because you mentioned a potential token, right? And if the token is volume based, there's already a shit ton of volume on Polymarket. And we've seen it with a YOLO airdrop where, you know, people had, I don't know, 10K, 100K in volume on YOLO, and YOLO was doing billions in volume. And they were like disappointed with the airdrop, because to be a significant participant in there, you needed to do a couple millions in volume. And similarly, this will be the same for Polymarket, and even more so if there are user-created markets and bets, because even if you run through an approval process, and then you have, as you said, a more significant token holder, assume there's multiple rounds of token distributions, and they set up their own bet. And it's not even necessary that other people participate in that, but they themselves bet on a very easy bet that will, you know, resolve with a yes, for example, and make the entire market on that, and create a couple millions of volume under the assumption that what they pay in fees is less than the potential future token value. Then we could end up with a similar situation that we've seen with Blur, where obviously the farmers were trading amongst themselves. So we could potentially see a wash betting market happening. And we've already seen something, I would say, similar to that on YOLO specifically, where you had the moon or doom bets, where you could bet, is BTC going up or down in the next 5 minutes? And you had people betting 10 ETH it goes up, 10 ETH it goes down, pay the fees, which you would get back as a rake back either way. And by that, creating millions in volume on the platform. So if you do that,
I think it has to be an iterative process though, because I think with YOLO, they probably clocked onto it because they are rewarding people that have done say 8 to 10 consecutive wins in Moon or Doom now. So you can't do that by hedging anymore. So I think there is ways that people are always going to try and game the system. There's going to be rules that are hard and fast, so people are going to try and bypass those. And I think it has to be iterative, and the protocol has to respond to that in an agile manner to then actually make it productive, like protocol. But actually, something that interests me more about decentralized apps or prediction markets is like the apps that could be built on top of it. You could have like farming or agricultural, like they're concerned with like weather conditions. So being able to open up a prediction and effectively hedging their risk on their like in life assets, that could be something that's built on top of that. Or you could have, I don't know, like there's just a range. Go on.
You see this as an alternative to an insurance market. So say you're a farmer, you want to insure against potential devastating rainfall for your crops or other weather conditions that would be not in favor. That you basically compare insurance rates to a potential market that exists on a prediction market and see which way is more advantageous for you to hedge with.
Yeah, it's slightly more complex one though, because you have to size perfectly to hedge your position. I think say for instance, if you like put a bet on the weather, then you'd have to like say it could effectively become like a short on that. So you'd hedge your position, you lock in the price of your crops at a certain level, and then you close it out. But I think there's like, I think it's, for me, it's more the data and the analytics that could come with it. So you could have, like, insurers could use it as a form of information to then price their products. I think that's probably more of the angle that it would go, because like you have actuaries that will take ages to try and work out a particular price, like for the premium on a particular product. But if you've got like a massive data repository with people betting either way, they can then better predict like the future outcomes of certain events, and therefore price more accurately, and therefore like it becomes more competitive for the end user because the premiums they charge for that particular policy could be more realistic. So I think there's definitely ways that you can do it that like existing business models can then plug into these prediction markets if they have enough volume, because they'll become a lot more accurate. And then once you overlay AI and all this kind of stuff with it, it can go to a completely different level. And I think they think we're anywhere close to even seeing the full like potential of all that.
And we've already seen the first steps of an AI integration with Perplexity, where news coverage will be offered on specific bets. But this is also the point where I think that actually this farming volume that I referenced before is valuable, because I thought it's relevant on YOLO as well. If you have people, betting on both sides, on Moon and Doom, they create a market for someone who actually wants to take a directional bet that otherwise would not exist because there's not enough volume in the market. And I think we talked about this on the show in terms of sports betting, that there's this one guy with his team who basically is one of the biggest market makers in sports betting and does like 10 bill in volume a year, gets 10% rake back on his betting volume. All the sports betting platforms that he's basically operating with have to adjust the odds after he's done betting to basically make sure that they as a platform are still making money once the quote unquote regular customer is betting. And his business model basically is to get billions in volume done per year and lose less than 10%, because the delta between what he loses and what he gets back in his 10% rake back is what he takes home. And then the betting platforms get to advertise, like stake.com did, for example, that, hey, with the World Cup, we actually now sent out a Telegram message, mail, whatever it was, to their VIP customers and said, actually now for the first time we allow single bets of, I don't know what it was, 500K, $1 million or whatever, which you couldn't do before. And that's obviously not relevant for most people, but all of those platforms are very well aware that they make the most money with the few whales who come to play with 8-9 figure in either gambling or betting volume.
It's the same within life, in real life casinos, and the treatment that certain players get. Like they know they're going to spend a lot of money, so they'll douse them with like all these drinks and like luxury things. And yeah, I think as long as those incentives outweigh their losses, then they'll keep coming back.
Yeah, I think we could continue for the remainder of the show to talk about this topic. However, we still have the Web3 roundup to get through and 2 more headlines. So let's move on to the next segment. Let's have a look at the Web3 roundup first. to see what's going on with the rest of the market before we touch on the remaining two headlines. Sharing it on screen for the people watching us on YouTube or on X in video form. First piece of news, we have South Korea's pension fund, the NPS, which is the third largest fund in South Korea, snapping up nearly 34M in MicroStrategy shares to get some additional Bitcoin exposure. And the NPS is also holding over $45 million worth of Coinbase shares already. We had the second piece of news saying that Binance is to restart their India business after getting a local registration. A third piece of news, more from the art side, is that the digital art day sale, or art day week, to be more precise, by Sotheby's in New York had started. And it's a pretty cool exhibition that has auctions for digital art, including numerous NFTs such as Punks and Fidenzas. The fourth piece of news, more on the gaming side, we had the Avagotchi studio by Pixelcraft revealing their quite an interesting approach, in my opinion, a members-only Ethereum Layer 3 gaming chain. And they're using both Arbitrum-based tech and as well as Alchemy and Geist, and they are trying to make a chain where you actually have a sort of membership that's still open to everyone, but has membership benefits. Found it quite interesting because it's just a different way on how to approach a potential blockchain design. Then also very interesting news, final piece of news before we go on to the main headlines on CoinDesk, that stablecoin regulations could pose problems for Tether. JP Morgan says, to be more specific, that has to do with the MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Asset Regulations framework in the EU that is stipulating that 60% of the cash reserves that a stable coin is holding has to be held with European banks. And I think Tether is currently not compliant with that. And that could potentially be an issue, is the argument that JP Morgan is making, especially as additional stablecoin regulations are expected to come to the US as well next year. And that's then going to be a challenging environment. And we touched on this before when we were speaking about how Circle and USDC is approaching that. So the stablecoin regulatory will be definitely interesting, because what it means is that it actually could lead to more competition and weaken Tether's dominance. And we could see a bit more interesting, more competitive approaches to how stablecoins are designed. With the Web3 roundup out of the way, actually would like to move on to one of the two remaining news pieces. And I would like to get started with, it's actually the title of the show, the institutional BTC buys that are up massively. We have a couple statistics, data points on that. We have, sharing this on screen, just in the US alone, 1,950 funds, and I think Funky will like that a lot, who have reported that they own Bitcoin ETF holdings, with 701 funds of that actually purchasing Bitcoin ETFs for the first time this quarter. We have what I already have covered in the Web3 roundup, the NPS getting exposure to Bitcoin via the MicroStrategy stock. But even more importantly, and it's something that we touched on the show on, I don't know, was it a month ago? Was it a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about the Wisconsin Investment Board and their BTC purchase for the state pension fund? There's now a very in-depth article on that in the Pensions and Investments magazine, which is basically a staple for every pension fund, state pension fund manager in the US, that goes to explain those spot Bitcoin ETF buys. And if you think about the size of that, the state pension funds together in the US alone manage $6 trillion US dollars. That alone is triple the entire market cap of all cryptocurrencies being put together. And one more additional data point on that, and then I'm going to stop sharing the statistics and go to you, Sammy. Not necessarily an institution, but an interesting data point on large Bitcoin buyers was by Arkham. When we had the dip yesterday that you, Sammy, posted that you slept through, Marathon, the largest public BTC miner, definitely did not sleep through that, because they have been purchasing an additional 4,144 BTC, valued at approximately 250 mil, and boosting their strategic Bitcoin reserve to 25,000 BTC. Very curious to hear your thoughts, Sammy, if you also feel that this institutional buying pressure seems to accelerate this quarter.
Well, yeah, I think the structural change, I probably singing from the same hymn book, but yeah, my view hasn't changed. I think that the Bitcoin ETFs, and probably even the Ethereum ETFs are probably going to be significant demand, significant demand for the Bitcoin, like the underlying assets. I think there will be like a reduction in the amount that's circulating supply, which has a positive impact on price. And I do think that it's just going to be this gradual uptick over a long period of time. I don't think it's going to be a sudden swing, because I think if you're effectively plugging into the traditional finance markets, so they'll employ sort of traditional methods to accumulate these assets. So yeah, I think that it's just going to be over time. They're not going to be silly enough to buy a significant amount in one big swing that will boost the price ridiculously, because they'll want to get in like a decent average. And I do think that the ETFs, and it's something I frequently look at, like as long as there's continued inflows, and I think there was predictions that it will be around 150 billion of inflows within the first 12 months, which is significantly more than that's kind of come in so far. So I still expect there to be a lot of upside. And I think the more that we have these pension funds getting involved, and if they allocate 2 to 3% to their portfolios, then that's a significant amount of buy pressure that we've yet to see. So yeah, I'm pretty bullish. I think it's going to be over the next 6 to 12 months minimum. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 1 to 2 months per se. But I think 2025 will be an interesting year for sure.
A follow-up question on that before I will go to Funky, who has his hand up. On the one hand, you say, yes, of course, they're not going to market by $1 billion worth of BTC. On the other hand, all those institutions are kind of aware that the other institutions will also buy Bitcoin over the next couple of years. So do you think that there's like a bit of competition there trying to kind of front run your institutional peers, or doesn't that perspective, that way to think, make sense at all?
Well, I think the likes of BlackRock, they're not taking a directional bet. It's their clients that are buying in, so they'll just accumulate when their investors decide to. Well, the people who want to buy the ETFs will kind of just dictate when they want to buy. They will just take the fees on the assets under management. So the higher the price of Bitcoin, the more they'll earn anyway. So I think they have a vested interest in it going up in the long term. But yeah, it's the pension funds that I'm interested in, because the sheer amount of assets under management that they have, and if they change their strategic asset allocations or their investment mandates, then all of a sudden, that's when there'll be other investment funds wanting to front run, because you've got probably certain users of those particular investment funds or pension funds that will then decide, okay, well, I want some exposure to this. I want to choose that particular asset allocation that you've suggested now. And then once they turn those asset allocations on, then you'll probably see a lot of the individual pension holders of that particular pension fund decide to then go into that. And that's when you'll see the price go up. But ultimately, again, they'll take a cut on the fees, the actual pension fund, so they can make the strategic decision to change that allocation. But it's ultimately up to the people who have their pension funds with that particular pension fund manager that decide when that happens. And I don't think it's going to happen at once. You've got, the biggest wealth holders are boomers, so in the 60s, and I don't think we're going to change their minds. So I think it's probably going to be the next allocation of people. So once that wealth gets passed down through, I don't know, inheritance or whatever, then they start allocating to those pension funds that particular allocation for Bitcoin and stuff. That's when I think we'll see the moon. So I don't know whether, unless you've got hedge funds deciding to buy up a significant amount of Bitcoin because they take the directional risk. I don't know if we'd see it with pension funds unless their clients end up deciding, I want exposure to Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I have a couple of thoughts on that, but I know that we only have a couple of minutes left in the show, and I know that Funky loves this piece of news. So Funky, I want to go straight to you to hear your take on that.
Thank you, my friend. And just Sammy had a great take all around. So I'll just try and piggyback on some of the stuff he was saying. I think that boomers are starting to pay attention. Case in point is my uncle, who's about to be 70. And, he was asking me, he's been started to get curious, and he's already started to buy it in his brokerage account through the ETF. And I said to him, the next step is for you to actually take control of your own Bitcoin, hold your own coins, hold your own keys. And I'm going to show him how to use a ledger and all those kinds of things. I feel that we're still so early. I was just talking to a legislator here in Florida, and her comments revolved around the fact that, Bitcoin crashed tremendously, and I don't know, and I just don't think that the vast majority of people understand what's happening. I don't think that they know about BlackRock buying the Bitcoin. I don't think they understand about what's happening with the ETFs, and I think there is going to be a lag. But I feel that institutional demand is going to come on very strong. I mean, it shows with market leaders, whether it's MicroStrategy or Marathon, which I hold. And admittedly, like with Marathon, they actually issued a bunch of notes. And so the price of the shares crashed a bit. But as a long-term hold, I just feel like it's something that is a viable, proxy to BTC. So, at the end of the day, I'm very, very bullish. Of course, I actually bought the dip yesterday. I usually once a month just put some money into Bitcoin. And I even said to my wife this morning, I said, hey, we front ran because that's normally about 5 days out. And I said, because I see it under 60K as a tremendous amount of value NFA. And I know we got to close out the show. Thanks, Linder.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like, I think I've seen a mix with the demographic side of things. Like, my dad is 70, and like his viewpoint is like, I'm retired. Like, I don't like I have a nest egg. Like, I can just spend that and enjoy my retirement rather than put it into an asset that will appreciate or is likely to appreciate. But he actually wants to just spend it and enjoy his retirement. So I think it definitely depends on like how far you are through your retirement plan. Like, I look at people who are in their 60s, like they probably align with what your uncle said, where it's like, okay, well, I've got maybe 20-30 years left in retirement, so I think there is some value in trying to make a return over the next 5 years that outperforms the market. But yeah, I definitely think times are changing, and I think over the next 10 years we'll see a dramatic shift as the next kind of wave of people outside of the boomer market kind of come into play.
And talking about time, we are unfortunately out of time for today's show. Didn't manage to go into the last piece of news real quick. It was Donald Trump holding over $1 million in ETH, receiving NFT licensing fees. There's disclosures that show that Trump has made between $1 and $5 million in ETH, over 7 mil in an NFT licensing deal, and again also has plans to launch an additional NFT collection. However, we have to wrap up for the day. So thank you to you, Sammy, for hosting the show with me today. Thank you to Funky for joining us on stage. Thank you to everyone in the audience listening, and also shout out to our commenters on YouTube. Shout out to Tiro, Kashmir, and Overarch for sharing their takes in the comments with us. We are going to be back on Monday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, have a great weekend.